The moment everything went wrong began with a chair scraping against marble and a silence so sharp it felt like glass cutting through the room. What was meant to be an ordinary lunch, on an ordinary day, at an ordinary cafe turned into the kind of moment that splits a life cleanly in two. One choice, one instinctive act of kindness, would drag a buried past back into the light and force a single father to face the one truth he had spent years running from. Before we go deeper into this story, take a moment. If you believe kindness still matters in a world that often feels cold, if you believe people deserve second chances, please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Ethan Hale had not planned to be there. The cafe sat between a courthouse and a corporate tower, the kind of place where polished shoes and expensive watches were as common as the smell of roasted coffee beans. Ethan didn't belong to that world anymore. He came because it was close to his son's therapy center, and because it was one of the few places that didn't look at him twice for ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. He sat at a small table near the window, his jacket worn thin at the elbows, his hands rough from years of labor that left no room for prestige. Across from him, his 6-year-old son Noah colored quietly, his small body leaning slightly to one side, a reminder of the accident that had changed both their lives. Ethan watched him carefully, the way parents do when love has been sharpened by fear. Every moment felt borrowed, every peaceful breath felt fragile. The cafe buzzed with low conversations and the clink of porcelain until it didn't. A woman stood near the center tables, her posture stiff, her face pale in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. She was dressed simply but not poorly, and she held her bag close like armor. The people around her looked away, the way people do when discomfort threatens to spill onto them. Ethan didn't hear the words that triggered it all. He only saw the way her shoulders collapsed, and the way the man across from her leaned back with casual cruelty, enjoying the spectacle. Something old stirred inside Ethan, something he had buried under routine and responsibility. He knew that posture. He recognized humiliation when he saw it. Without thinking, he stood. The sound of his chair moving drew attention, and suddenly eyes were on him. Ethan didn't raise his voice or throw accusations. He simply stepped into the space, positioning himself between the woman and the man who had been tearing her down. His presence was calm, steady, unyielding. The room felt smaller around them, as if the air itself was holding its breath. People whispered, phones shifted, judgment spread like a stain. Ethan wasn't a hero. He was a man who had once failed spectacularly, who lived every day trying to be better for a little boy who deserved more than his past. But in that moment he chose decency over safety, empathy over anonymity. The cafe manager approached, tense and uncertain, and the situation dissolved as quickly as it had formed. The woman murmured something Ethan barely registered, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. Before leaving, the man scoffed and returned to his drink, as if nothing of consequence had occurred. Ethan sat back down, his heart pounding harder than he expected. Noah looked up, confused but trusting, and Ethan forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He thought that would be the end of it. He thought wrong. Minutes later, a man in a tailored suit stood near Ethan's table, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry, he wasn't grateful. He was curious in a way that made Ethan's skin prickle. The man didn't speak long, but his presence carried weight, the kind that came from power rather than personality. He glanced at Noah, then back at Ethan, and something clicked behind his eyes. Ethan felt it before he understood it. The past, the one he had carefully packed away and labeled finished, was beginning to stir. By the time Ethan gathered Noah and stepped outside, the sky had darkened. Clouds rolled in heavy and low, mirroring the weight pressing against his chest. He tried to shake it off, telling himself he was imagining things. But that night, after Noah fell asleep clutching his favorite toy, Ethan received an email that froze him in place. It wasn't threatening, it was polite, professional, an invitation to meet. The sender's name was one Ethan hadn't seen in nearly 8 years, tied to a life he no longer recognized as his own. Ethan had once been someone else. Before the accident, before the headlines, before his name became synonymous with disgrace in certain circles. He had been a rising executive in a powerful firm. Ambitious, brilliant, reckless. He had trusted the wrong people, signed the wrong documents, and when everything collapsed, he had been the one left standing in the wreckage. The truth had been complicated, tangled in corporate greed and silent deals, but the world preferred simple villains. Ethan took the fall. Prison had followed. So had the accident that injured Noah during a visitation day that would haunt Ethan forever. When he was released, there were no apologies, no corrections, no headlines reclaiming his innocence. Only doors that refused to open, and a future that shrank down to survival. Now, somehow, his past had found him again, triggered by a moment of compassion at the wrong table, on the wrong day. The meeting took place in a glass building that reflected the city like a mirror, forcing Ethan to see himself as he approached, older, thinner, hardened in places that used to be soft. Inside, the man from the cafe waited, along with others Ethan didn't recognize but instinctively understood held influence. They spoke of investigations reopened, of evidence resurfaced, of people willing to talk now that the climate had changed. They spoke of Ethan's name, his conviction, and the quiet acknowledgement that he had been convenient rather than guilty. Ethan listened in stunned silence. Vindication sounded like a foreign language. He had spent so long learning how to live without it that the idea felt dangerous. But there was a cost: public exposure, media attention, scrutiny that would inevitably touch Noah. Ethan felt the familiar pull of fear, the instinct to protect his son at all costs, even if it meant staying invisible forever. He walked out without agreeing to anything, his thoughts tangled in a war between justice and safety. Days passed, messages came, pressure mounted. Meanwhile, the woman from the cafe appeared again, this time in a letter slipped under Ethan's door. She wrote about how his intervention had stopped her from making a choice she could not undo. She wrote about how she hadn't expected anyone to care, especially not a stranger with tired eyes and a child's backpack slung over one shoulder. Her words landed heavier than any offer of redemption. They reminded Ethan why he had stood up in the first place, why he had chosen to live quietly but honestly even when the world had labeled him something he was not. The decision came on an ordinary morning, as Noah struggled through his exercises, frustration tightening his small face. Ethan knelt beside him, encouraging without pushing, loving without condition. In that moment, Ethan understood something with painful clarity. Hiding had not spared Noah pain. It had only delayed a reckoning. Ethan agreed to tell the truth. The days that followed were brutal. His name resurfaced across screens and conversations, paired with words like reconsidered, questioned, reopened. Old colleagues avoided him. Others reached out with guilt-laced messages that came years too late. Cameras appeared outside his building. Noah asked questions Ethan answered carefully, honestly, never painting himself as a hero or a victim. What surprised Ethan most was the public response. Yes, there was skepticism. Yes, there was cruelty. But there was also something else. People remembered the cafe incident, the quiet defense of a stranger without expectation of reward. That moment became a lens through which they viewed his past. Character, it seemed, could echo backward as well as forward. When the official statement came clearing Ethan of intentional wrongdoing, there was no celebration, only a deep, exhausted breath. Justice did not erase the years lost, the damage done, or the scars that remained. But it shifted the weight enough for Ethan to stand a little taller. Opportunities followed slowly, not the glamorous kind he once chased, but meaningful ones. Consulting work, advocacy roles, a chance to speak about accountability and compassion from someone who had lived on both sides of judgment. The woman from the cafe attended one of his talks, sitting quietly in the back. She didn't approach him afterward. She didn't need to. Their lives had intersected long enough to change course, and that was enough. Ethan's life did not transform overnight into something cinematic or perfect. Noah's recovery remained uncertain. Bills still arrived. The future stayed unwritten. But something fundamental had shifted. Ethan no longer lived as a man hiding from his reflection. As this story draws close, if it has stirred something inside you, if it has reminded you that small acts can ripple into lives we may never fully see, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement truly matters. And before the final moments fade, we have a special request. Please comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words help this community grow. On a quiet afternoon, back at the same cafe, Ethan sat at the same table by the window. Noah laughed softly over a spilled drink, his joy uncomplicated and bright. The room hummed with life, unaware of how close it had once come to becoming something else entirely. Ethan watched his son and understood, finally, that the wrong table and the wrong day had led him exactly where he needed to be. Not to erase the past, but to face it with courage, and to prove that kindness, even when it costs everything, is never wasted.